Whoops, I just gave an advertisement to George Washington's ice cream place. Back here to Learning Suite. Okay, so on Learning Suite, a couple of things going on today. Some stuff to download, but we are going to begin. I'm just going to begin by going to this this presentation, which I have here in Google Slides. Every time I tried to do this, when it was in PowerPoint, it would like kill the recording. So I don't know if this is going to work or not. So this is kind of overview of relational database management. So the whole idea today is we're going to use Excel to interact with database management systems. And that's what your next project is. And so the whole point of relational database management systems is to manage data. And it does it in a way, it does it in kind of a weird way. It organizes data into a bunch of different tables, and it lets you join them together and so forth. In fact, when we talk about relational database management, we are talking, where does the term relational come from? Do you know? Yeah, we often think it's because you can join a primary key to a foreign key and link two tables together. It has nothing to do with why it's called relational database management. A relation, the mathematical name for a table, rows and columns, is a relation. And so when we talk about relational database management, it's database management where the data is organized into tables. And so there's a part anytime we're working with a relational database management system, and this is true for virtually any database management system. We're getting now more popular NoSQL databases that are not organized along the relational model. But this part is still true, and that is we've got some piece of software that sits there and runs, and it's a service, and it has control over the data. It's responsible for, those are like little tiny things here. Data security, integrity, recovery. If we're right in the middle of updating something and someone comes by and kicks the power cord out, or there's some kind of catastrophic failure, the database engine is responsible to be able to recover from stuff like that, to be able to define the structure of data, to be able to put data in, to get data out. But the thing that the database engine spends 99% of its time doing is answering questions about the data. Once we get the data set up, it may spend a little more than 1% of its time putting data in, but largely we're asking questions about the data and getting the results back. So that's what the database engine does. Nobody else is allowed to go access this data except by going through the database engine. In fact, database engines often will encrypt this data so that no one else can access that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the front end. We're going to use a little Star Trek IV to get there. Let me see if I can start this playing and go ahead to 156. Okay, here we go.
Who carries that big and stuff?
I noticed. Now just suppose, I were to show you a way to manufacture a wall that would do that.
Okay, how many of you have never seen this movie? Awesome! This is Star Trek IV. This is Save the Whales. They go back in time, try to save the whales. He's trying to get some plexiglass to be able to build an aquarium inside a Klingon bird of prey that they stole back in whatever is their current time. Okay.
The same job, but be only 1 inch thick. Would that be worth something to you? Eh?
You're joking. Perhaps the professor could use your computer. Please.
Computer?
Okay, so it's like an Apple II something. This is really old technology for you. Imagine how old it is here for Montgomery Scott.
Computer? Hello, computer.
Just use the keyboard.
The keyboard. Oh, great.
It's amazing what he can do with just a few taps. Okay, I'm not sure that was really worth the minute or so we spent on it. Oh boy, let's see if I can get to the next. I'm not quite sure how to get to the next. Here we go. Okay, so the whole point then is there's got to be some kind of interface, some kind of front end that the user actually interacts with. And so it's totally separate software from the database engine. And so that the front end displays data, it formats data, it aligns data, it might sort data, but the whole point is that it interacts with the user. So anytime we're talking about relational database management system, or really virtually any database management system, then this is the structure that we have. We've got the user who interacts with front-end software. Anything you see, any software you see and work with, if you're working with a database management system, is front-end software. The engine software is non-visual. You don't see it. The front end then makes whatever request we need to make to the database engine. It might be instructing the engine to insert some data. It might be asking the engine to give back some data. The response comes back to the front end, which then has the responsibility to show it to the user. And so typically the language that we live with here is structured query language. So this is the primary way that a front end will interact with the database engine. Most often, your front end application is going to not ask you to type in structured query language. It's going to ask, hey, what do you want to see? And it might give you some drop-down list, whatever, and then it will format some kind of statement, structured query language typically, that goes to the engine. The engine then processes that and sends back the response. So where we're headed today is we are going to use Excel as the front end to connect on to a Microsoft SQL Server backend to be able to manipulate data there in the database. Questions on this overall approach? How many of you are going, I totally already knew all of that? A couple of you. Okay, good. I'm just trying to see if it's something I should keep talking about to future classes. Are you still recording? Looks like we are. Okay. So let's just go ahead, open up a new workbook. First thing I want to show, and show this very briefly, and for some reason, are you all on Eduroam? What network are you guys on? Yeah. Can you still get to BYU Secure? No. Is BYU Wi-Fi open or is it secure? So Eduroams have to. So this might work for you if you're on Eduroam, but when I tried it earlier today, it took forever. So we'll see if it takes a long time to connect. So the first thing I want to point out is that Excel has great built-in tools for consuming data from a relational database management system. It's just there. Actually, before we do this, let me show one more thing. You're welcome to come along and do this as well if you want. I'm just going to go to data.websql.org. So this is the database environment that I developed and maintain for educational purposes. But if you go to data.websql.org and put a username and password in of demo, you should be able to say select. And the idea here is that you just put in structured query language. This web page is the front end. The web server that we're interacting with passes the SQL off to the database engine. It gets the response, and then the web server formats it for display back here. Let me just do redcat.employee. So redcat is one of the database schemas that we have here. I should be able to execute that. I'm typing the SQL here in the front end. I hit submit. My browser sends it to the web server. The web server then hands that off to the database engine, gets the results back, and displays it. So this is what we're about to see Excel do, but through a different interface. Get the idea here? Okay. So I'm going to come here to Excel, and I am going to come to the Data tab. I'm going to get data from Database and from SQL Server. So we're using SQL Server instead of Oracle or some other database because the drivers for SQL Server are built into Windows, so I know that you have them. If we're going to try to connect onto Oracle, we'd have to another step to make sure that we have the Oracle client installed on your computer to be able to make the request. But here we'll just use SQL Server. Hopefully I can remember what we have to do here. So here's the name of the server is data.websql.org. And you might feel comfortable just watching this. What we're doing here, the rest of the day is not going to depend on this. And this is not part of how your project's going to work. So, but I want to show you the interface to read from databases in Excel. The database we're connecting on is called user data. And no advanced options, we'll say OK. making the request to hopefully show the tables that I have accessible. The first thing to realize is that anytime we're communicating with some kind of server out there on the internet, we usually think of it just in terms of a host name. The host name, of course, gets translated into an IP address that we actually use to route traffic to that particular device. But there's another piece of information that we always have to have when we're communicating with a server on the internet protocol. It's the host name or the IP address and what? You know what it is? It's a port, yeah. So, if you just type in, go to a browser and you type in, byu.edu, you're thinking, well, I'm not giving it a port. Yeah, you are. The browser is saying you didn't specify a port, and so we're going to assume you want the default port. And so it's just going to plug port 80 on there, which is the default port for web interaction. If it's HTTPS, the default port is 443. And so it's just a number that says, there are tens of thousands of ports possible on any machine. And so when I have a service running on a computer out there on the internet, it is the host name gets me to the machine, but then I could be talking to lots of different services on that machine. There could be a database server, there could be a male server, could be a female server. There could be like a FTP server, there could be any other kind of server, SSH server. There could be lots of different servers on there. And so it's not enough to have the host name, you have to also supply the port number. Now, just like the browser default support number, Microsoft SQL Server is saying, oh, you didn't supply a port number, which would just be supplied with a comma after the host name, so you get a comma, whatever the port number is. You must mean port 1433, which is the default port for SQL Server. But here's the thing. Some networks don't route all the ports, particularly the BYU Open network. It routes port 80. It'll route web traffic. It routes port 443, secure network traffic. It routes a couple other ports, but it does not route port 1433 traffic. So if you try to connect using a network that's not set up to say, essentially what BYU is saying with its open Wi-Fi, we'll let you do some normal stuff. But if you want to access a database directly, you got to get authenticated. You want to browse the internet? Okay. You want to access a database? No, what it says. And so there's that kind of other layer of complexity in being able to get to the database that you're talking about. Your network has to be able to route the ports that you're using. Okay, that was really just a stall till these tables showed up. So these then are all the tables that I have access to on the server that I'm connected to. And so let me just come down here to that same table. I'm just going to get the Red Cat employee table. And I will say load. Not sure if I want to wait for the preview or not. And I'll just load it. And I'm kind of surprised that that flashed away from the worksheet. Hopefully it comes back here very shortly. Most of what we're feeling here, I think, is latency in the EduRoam network. But here it is. So now it has brought back that same data. We've got Louis McDougall, Audrey McLeod. Should be the same thing that we were seeing here. Yeah, here's Louis and Audrey. So it's two different ways getting at the same database. So this really is a query. If this data changes, I can come here, hit the refresh all button, and it just makes the request and brings the new data in. If I come in here and change this, I want to change, Louis to Louis. I can change that data here locally, but this is a one-way connection. I bring that data down here, and no matter what I do here, it's not going to change the source data. If I say refresh all here again, we should see that Louis go right back to Louis, spelled the other way. And there it has corrected. And so step one is just to make sure you understand, hey, we can just consume data through the tools that are available here in Excel. But the task for us today and for your next project is to be able to insert data into a database. It's to be able to read a bunch of workbook files, extract the data off that you need, and push it into a database. And so to do that, it's going to take VBA. So there's no interface built into Excel for doing that. Okay, so we can just do that right here in this workbook. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this sheet that I'm on, just to make sure that we are clear. There's no magic between what we just did. We'll delete that. I really do want to delete that. I guess I'll delete this query here as well. I'm sure I want to delete that. So I'm back to a blank workbook just with a single sheet in it. And now is a time that you want to follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Visual Basic Editor. Alt F11. I'm going to insert a module. All right, and now let's go take a look at some notes that I've put on Learning Suite. So we've got some kind of like database connection notes or something. Connection example.txt. And this is a stub to kind of get us going working with databases. So I'm going to copy that and just going to paste it here into my new module. We'll talk about everything that's here, and it's all pretty important. Okay, so I'm trying to think if we've done this next part before or not. I don't remember. Typically, when we create object variables, we do them to connect on to existing objects. And so, we might say, dim s as worksheet, set s equal to a particular worksheet. So we're not creating we're not even creating that worksheet. The worksheet already exists. Now, when we worked with charts, then we said, we're going to be creating objects. So we created a chart object, we created a shape object, and we bound those onto these things that we were creating. But those objects, even though it's kind of one step higher than binding onto existing objects, those charts or those objects are stuff Excel natively knows how to work with. It's just available. We are about to do something with VBA that Excel knows nothing about. And so we've got to tell it, hey, these objects that we are about to start using, they're not objects that are built into Excel. These are object classes that are defined somewhere else, and we have to make a reference to the definition of the object. Here's how we do that. So before we can do, in fact, even before this code will run that we pasted in here, we've got to have a reference to the Adodb library. ADO stands for Active Data Object, DB is database. So this is the Active Data Object Database Library. Here's how we do that. We say Tools, References. And then we're going to scroll down. It starts with Microsoft, so we're going to scroll down to the block that says Microsoft. There's a whole lot of them. And we're looking for Microsoft ActiveX Data Access Library. Data Access Objects. I got so many to choose from. 2.0, 2.1, 2.5, 2.6. I like 6.1. What happened to 3, 4, and 5? I don't know, but 6.1 will be the one for me. It's just the most recent one, but do make sure, this is really tiny, let me zoom in here. Plus, Windows Plus. Do make sure, okay. You go away, you come back. Make sure you've got the Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects library, not the ActiveX Data Objects Record Set library. Okay, so make sure you select it and make sure there's a check mark in the checkbox. And that will, what that does is it says to VBA, there's some objects that we're going to want to create here. This lets VBA lets the interpreter know where it has to go to create those objects. Without making this reference, we'd say, hey, create one of these database connection objects, and we go, no idea what you're talking about. But because we've added this library, and it goes, oh, wait a minute, he told me we're going to be working with something weird. And here it is. So that's what that does. It makes it so that the interpreter can create the objects that we're going to try to create. So now that I've made that connection in this workbook, I don't have to do that again. This workbook goes to another computer. That reference goes along with it. And as long as the object is declared on the machine that we're working on, it'll be okay. But all these objects, it's possible for them to be uninstalled on the target machine. So it's not enough just to have the reference, you have to have the objects there as well. These are by default are part of Windows, and so they should be there as long as you're on a Windows machine. Question?
So I got an error saying with existing module project library. Is that because it's already been selected?
The name, say it again?
It says name conflicts with existing module, project, or object library.
Name conflicts with existing object, module, or project library. Never heard of it. Parker, just come over here and look over all the references and help him see if he's already got one selected or something that might be doing the same thing. Okay. So now we've got that connection. So let's just take a look at the variables that we're declaring here. So first one is I'm making an object to be able to handle the connections. Really, to be able to pull data back from a database server, there's two things I got to do. One, I got to get connected onto the server. That's an object by itself, just to manage the connection to the server. And second, I've got to have an object that handles the data that's coming back. That's a record set. So we'll see those here in just a minute. So let me go ahead and I'm going to type this part again just so we can see how it comes in when you're typing it. So dimcn, that's just a variable name, could call it whatever we want, as ADO, so ADODB, there it is, dot, and then we should see the various options here, and one of these is the connection object. So if you can type in dimcn as ADODB and it gives you something to choose from, you know you've got the connection that you need to those database objects. Okay, so we're going to pause right here and just make sure that everyone is able to get that connection made. In other words, if you delete as and the rest of the line and type in as ADODB, that comes up. So let's just take a look. Yeah, and remember we need the keyword in here, new, which says not only is this variable going to be allowed to connect onto a connection object, create one of those objects and bind onto it immediately. That's what that's saying. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so we've got a connection object. We're going to come back to these other variables here in just a second. Actually, we'll talk about the connection string first. So this is CS. It's just a connection string. It is a string that provides the information that your system needs to be able to connect onto that database. Here's what this connection string says. It says we're using a particular driver. So the driver we're going to use is SQL Server. So that means that installed on this computer somewhere is a driver called SQL Server. In fact, if I come here and do run, let's see, ODBC, add 32, should be 32-bit drivers here. I should be able to come here and make a new data source. Yeah, here's a list of my drivers, and there's one of them here that's the SQL Server driver. And so so my computer has stuff installed on it to be able to connect onto databases. And the reason we're using SQL Server is because I know the SQL Server driver is installed on all of your Windows machines. If I was going to connect onto Oracle, I'd have to go through some other process here that actually installs the Oracle driver so that when I clicked over here to add one of these connections, that Oracle would be listed here. And when you see here the Microsoft ODBC driver for Oracle, ignore that. It never, ever, ever works. You got to get the one from Oracle for that to work. Okay. So the first part that we're saying in this string is to use one of the drivers that's already installed on the computer. You have the SQL Server driver installed. So the second one says, hey, actually I probably should talk about the last one here. This one then says, what server are you going to connect to? And so here's the host name of the server that we're connecting to. It's the same one that we connected to on the example, as well as where we went for that web page that could do database interaction. And then out of all the databases that server manages, which database are you going to connect onto? And the database is user data. So you are either setting up a database so you know these things, or you've got to talk to someone who's administering the data to be able to find out this information to be able to make the connection. All right, we are then, okay, so that's the connection string. Now, we are calling the open method of the connection object. So CN is the connection object that we created, and we're calling the open method of it. We are giving it the string to connect with. That's the CS string that we just defined here. And we're giving it the username and the password. My double secret username and password that I'm publishing on YouTube. So there it is. So questions here? So if we can get to here, then we have successfully made the connection to the database. In fact, I'm going to, you can leave this part in. Actually, we'll talk through the rest of it and then we'll run it. It's not doing anything yet, it's just kind of getting ready to do something. So we're now saying we've got a variable here called SQL that's just going to hold the structured query language statement that I'm going to pass off to the database engine. So here's the first thing to realize it now. We are now dealing with two different languages. We're writing in VBA, but the language that we need to be able to extract the data from the database is called structured query language. The VBA interpreter does not know what to do with structured query language. You know, we try to tell, we just take this statement and tell VBA, select star from redcat.customer. It would go, I have no idea what you're talking about. Select, what's select? It's nothing. It doesn't know what it is because it's the wrong language. So all VBA is going to do with the structured query language is going to hold it and then send it across the connection to the server because the database server is the one who's going to process the structured query language statement. So we have to work with structured query language in our VBA, but it's always going to be manipulating strings. We're just going to have this. The VBA is going to keep track of it as a string, and then we will pass that string to be evaluated at the database engine. So do I still have that picture up? So in this case, we've got VBA that we're programming to send a structured query language over to the database server, and that's what's happening here. And so we've got a structured query language statement sitting in this variable, and now we're going to use the other object that we're creating. So we're creating also a thing called a record set. So a record set, just as the name suggests, it will allow us to manipulate a set of records. And so we are going to open the record set object. We're going to tell it the structured query language statement that we want to use to define the set that we're going to bring back. And then we tell it the connection that we want to use to open that. Would it be possible for us to have 3 or 4 different connections open to different databases and kind of pulling data from one database and using a different connection to push it somewhere else? Absolutely, that's the whole idea. And so that's why when I open the record set, I have to tell it which of all my many connections I'll be using. Now, there's only one here, but I still have to tell it that's the one that we're going to use. Now, we're not doing anything with that except closing the record set and then closing the connection. So this is really boring code. It doesn't do anything visually. But if this executes without error, then we're successfully making the connection to the server, executing the query, we're getting at least one of the records back, and then we're closing it. So next place I want to check, let's make sure that you can execute this code without error. It doesn't do anything yet, but execute it without error. Let's just check and make sure we get there. Okay, so now we're successfully connecting onto the database. We've sent the request for the records, and they've come back. So now, let's go ahead and put a breakpoint here. Yeah, I think we probably can. Now, here's one of the things. Here's just kind of a rule. When we open up a connection to a database, we want to open up the connection because it uses resources, not just on our machine, but it uses resources on the server as well. And so I'm about to do something that we don't want to make a habit of. And that is, I'm going to open up a connection, and we're going to hold that connection open while we kind of poke around at this. Typically, what you want to think is, okay, open a connection, do what I need to do, close the connection. And you want that to happen, within a second or two. But because we're trying to find our feet working with databases, I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint here after the connection's open. That's going to maintain an open connection on the server. It's using resources on the server that we're communicating with. So it looks like we've probably got about 30 or 40 people who are trying this. 30 or 40 open connections should be okay, and I don't know of anyone else who's using the server right now, so I think we're okay. But there's usually like a hard limit. So you get to 120 connections, and the server will just start rejecting them. Sorry, I already got 120 connections open, and that's all I'm configured to handle. So if you're getting here without error still, then we're good and connected. Okay, so I'm going to open up my immediate window, and I'm just going to poke around with the record set object a little bit. So I'm just going to say rs dot fields rs. I don't know if I can say count. Row count? Record count. rs.record count. Depending on the way this record set is open, it may or may not know how many records there are in this record set. Okay, so that's telling us the way I've opened it, it doesn't know how many records there are. In fact, this record set really right now has only access to the first record. By the time we get to the end, we can probably ask it and it will be able to tell us how many records the record set has. And there's different parameters that we can set about how we open this record set. We could open it in such a way that it would know. Now, of course, if it knows how many records there are, then it's had to access all those records up front. So you've got to be careful, because if you're running a query that's got hundreds of thousands or even millions of records, and you say, hey, open this in such a way that it'll read the records to begin with, that's going to be a problem. And so here I'm just using the general approach. But the record set object has a property called fields. And so now this is a collection. It's a zero-based collection. So I should be able to ask, what is the name of the first field? It's customer ID. What is the name of the next field? First name. And I can ask for the value as well. So the name of my first customer is James. First name, presumably last name is number 2. But I can access these not just, as you might expect with a collection. In a collection, you can always go after it by its number, but if it has a name, you can also go after it by its name. So I could supply in here last name, and it will bring back the last name for that record. Now, I got this whole record set, but I asked for last name, and there's like 4,000 records in this record set. But I asked for last name, and it's only showing me 1. Why? There's like 4,000 of them here. And here's the answer. I'm not expecting you to know the answer to this. The answer is, the reason why it only gives me 1 is because the record set object only has access to 1 record at a time. And so I've got to tell it to get the next record if I want to see the next record. So let's take a look at how this works. So I'll come down here. I've opened my record set. And now I'm going to come in here and say, debug. Let's see, why don't we go ahead and write this out to the worksheet straight away. So I'm going to need something to keep track of which row I'm on, dim r as a long integer. Come in here and say r equals r plus 1. So it'll start off at 0, and so that'll get me to 1 as the first one. I'm not sure what sheet I'm on. Here on sheet 2, I'm just going to work on the active sheet, whatever it is. So now cells, row number r, column number 1 dot value is equal to rs dot fields, and I'll just go ahead and get the first one by its number. We'll get the value of that. I want to go ahead and get the customer number, first name and last name. And I'll go ahead and get 2 of them by number because it's easy, and then I'll get the last name just to show that you can get it by the name of the field as well. Okay, so I'm going to run this code, and let's make it so we can see it happen. All right. This should put right there in A1, it should put the customer ID. 12 should put the first name. Whoops, it's going into the same place every time. So let's column 2 and column 3. You come back and get the customer ID again. So I've got the first name and I've got the last name and the customer ID. So far, so good. Now I got to tell the record set to get the next record. And so I'll do that just by saying rs.moveNext. I'll execute that line. Then I'll take my active statement indicator right back up here to the r+1. And I'll execute these. And that should bring in my next customer there at the bottom. Do you feel a loop coming on? Yeah, there's a loop coming on. But how we control this loop is different. How do you know when you're done? There's a property of the record set called EOF. Stands for end of file. It's a Boolean property, and it just tells you if you've read the last record yet or not. And so I'm going to come up here, and just before my r equals r+1, I'll put a do loop. Do until rs.eof. Do until the end of file property is true. And then I'll come here and put a loop. And I'll tab everything in. And I'll drag back up to the top of the loop. All right, so now it's going to try to execute. It's going to say, okay, we're doing a loop. Am I at the end of the file? No, I'm not. So this will be false. Do until false. So this will continue until whatever expression here is true. And so that should bring me in. I'll just step through this F8 and get the next record and the next record and the next record. Oh, looks like I got Frederick Wagner twice. That's just because kind of where I was. I don't actually expect it to increment. I'm certain he's not in the database twice. So, all right, I should be able to just cut that loose, hit play, and continue on from there. And it should bring in those 4,000 records. And it'll take most of a second to do that. And control down. Yeah, 4,418 records. So that is how you iterate across a record set. That's an important skill to be able to have because you got these records back. You've got to do something with those one record at a time. Questions? Question here. The question is, do I ever set this equal to true? And the answer is, I don't. It's read only. I don't get to tell it whether it's true or not. So, oh, you could put equals true here. So the question is, does this assume equals true if you don't put the equals true? And the answer is no, it's not assuming the equals true. So do until whatever comes after here has to be a Boolean expression. It has to be a condition, something that evaluates the true or false. So when I look there, it has to be true or false. So what I've done here is I've said, the end of file property is itself true or false. So when this is true, the whole expression now is true equals true, which is true. When this returns false, this whole expression is false equals true, which is false. So anytime you have a condition like this that says something equals true, you don't need the equals true. As long as this is a Boolean expression itself, because it's already true, and that's what we're just trying to get to true or false here. That's already the way it is. Question in the back? That's right. So what happens is so every time I ask about EOF, it's going to return false until I have read the last record and tried to read one more. So when I read the last record, I print the last record. Here, when I say move past and I try to move past the last record, that's when the EOF flag gets set to true. And so I've printed my last record. I move past the last record. I come back up here and I go, oh, is the end of file true? Yes. And so I drop out of the loop. Okay, question here. You probably missed the move next. Yeah, it would have been a good idea for us to put a do events in here so we could break into it. Won't help you now. Does control break do anything for you? And is it printing the same one over and over again? That's miraculous. Okay, let's do another example. Ultimately, we've got to get to where we are pushing data into the database. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and get that set up. So let me come over here and let's do something Thanksgiving themed. So I'm going to create, let's see, I can zoom in a little bit here, Control plus. Now, you're not going to do this, just watch this. We'll all use the same table. Create table, Thanksgiving favorites, TGF, Thanksgiving favorite. Okay, so I'm going to put an ID, going to be an integer, identity, 1, 1. This is going to make it so it automatically counts up, and I'll make it the primary key. Primary key, read in the book if you want to know about primary key. Why don't we just put a student name, or just call student. Varchar, so variable length character field. And why don't we say 25, and favorite. Also varchar 25, or varchar 50. Okay, that should, if I could find my button. Control minus, Control 0. Now, if that executes without error, I have to log in as somebody else to be able to create this. And I'm going to create this in the demo space. Is there a demo space? I got to put it somewhere that we have access to it, and I'm not sure if that will do it. Okay, got to think of a different username. Try one more time. Not sure what other usernames I'm supposed to know for this database. SQL Server. Oh. I think I changed the password. That guy doesn't have permission. It would be nice to be able to create this table, but we can use one that's already there. If I can just remember where it is. What's that? Do I expect to get an F? Oh, yeah. So, okay. So here's a table already created. I'm not sure. I must need to create this with administrator permissions, which I don't have with, I don't remember the administrator's username or password. So here's one that's already here. And we should the demo account has insert permissions on this table. So let me order this by ID in descending order. Order by ID, descending order. So this should put the most recently inserted one here at the top. So you could do this part along with me if you like over here just in the web SQL interface, or you can just watch, that's fine. We'll do it in Excel in just a moment. So here's a statement to insert data into this table. Insert into, and then I put the table name. This is called student. I then give it the list of fields that I want to put the values in for. It'll be first name, last name, and expected grade. First underscore name, last underscore name, expected grade. I then say values, and then I put in the values in the order that I want. So first name, single quotes, first name, why don't we put George Washington? Oh, it's first name then last name. First name George, last name Washington. Grade, I don't know. How would he do in VBA? Maybe not so good. C. All right, I'll execute this. I should execute both of those statements with a semicolon between them here. So it tells me the first record was affected, or one record affected, and so here's that new record now that's a part of that table. So what we have to do is be able to get some data and push it into this database. And so that's our next task. Should we do it? Let's do that.
Really quick.
Question here.
Is it like, you mentioned that you want to close the connection as soon as possible, but if you're putting in a bunch of data, it's faster to just connection at the beginning loop?
Yeah, let me handle the question. So the question is, hey, you said, Professor, you want to open that connection and close it as quickly as you can. But if you're going to be putting in like hundreds of records, should you open the connection, put the record in, close it, and then open the connection again, put the record in, close it? Or should you open the connection, push all those records in, and then close it? And the answer is, you should open the connection, put all those records in, and then close it. What you don't want to do is open a connection and leave it open while a user is thinking about something. So it's possible for us to open the connection and say, hey, type something in, and then use that connection to save the data. User types something else in, save the data. Type something else in, saves the data. We don't want to do that. If the user's typing something in, we want to say, great, type something in, and when you're ready to enter this data, you let us know. We'll open the connection, put it in, close the connection. And that way the connection's closed while the user is doing some process that's going to take several seconds or several minutes. So we don't hold that connection open longer than normal, than needed. But yeah, it does take time to open and close that connection. And so as long as you're not waiting for a user, the code's running quickly, then you're okay just to open the connection and do everything. Okay. So let's do this. I'm going to copy the whole part about getting the connection. Oops. Let me make sure we're on the one that we had. So let me close the example. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and copy this one that we just made? Yeah. So it's called DB1. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it as DB2. So now I've got something called DB2. Do I need to make the reference again? No, because I made the reference. I did that reference for the whole workbook, so we're good for that. Now, DB2 is going to insert data. And so we do not need, the record set allows us to pull data back from the database. We don't need a record set to insert data. So I'm going to come and I'm going to back off. I'll still need a connection string. I'll still need SQL. I won't need to keep track of a record that I'm on or the record set. So I'm going to get rid of my declaration for RS as well as R. And I'm going to come to where I've got the connection open. And everything here from where I'm opening the record set, rs.open, until rs.close, I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm going to bring in my insert statement because that's got me pretty good. If you haven't typed this already, you'll be doing a little typing here, but I trust you're much better at typing than I am, so it won't take long. I'm going to make this my structured query language statement. Now, let's go ahead and give him a B this time. Database demo. I don't think so. I think this is the same. This is the database that we're going after. The question was, do I need to change the database? And I'm getting connected onto the same database. I'm logging in with the same credentials. So I think I'm in the right place. Okay, so now I just have to execute that query. I've got to take this statement and send it off to the server to be executed. And I will do that with cn, the connection, dot execute. And then I give it the SQL that I want to execute. So if I run that, I should be able to come back and submit my request again. There should be several new Washingtons. So somebody put in, Misha the man is expecting an A+, I guess, here. We got a couple for George Washington, and some of these are going in. So we're okay. But if we're just hard coding things into the query, what use is it, right? You got to come and actually do everything, by typing into VBA. No, we don't want to do that. We want to have some way to get information from the user, or in this case, for the project that you'll be working on, you're going to be reading that data off of a bunch of Excel files. You've got to figure out how to format that into an insert statement and then push that across. So we'll do something similar here. Why don't we just kind of ask for this information to come in from the user. But let's format, I'm going to first format this structured query language statement to be able to be a little bit more general. So I'm going to take here George, and I'm just going to put a parameter in here. This is not a parameter in the structured query language sense. It's just something that I'm going to be able to replace. So I've got angle brackets there, F name. I'll do the same thing for the last name value, L name, and then grade. So the idea is I'm starting off now with a template, an SQL template, and I'm going to get some information from the user, and I'm going to look at what the user gives me, and I'm going to change the string to have what the user gave me as part of the SQL. Question here. You're going to see, the question is about these angle brackets. Can you explain this? You're going to see this in just a second. This is just something that I will be able to use VBA to replace in this template with the value the user gave me. I want it to be unusual enough that I don't accidentally replace it kind of somewhere else in the query. Okay, so let me dim data as a variant. And then let me get the data from the user. So before I execute, I'm going to say data equals input box. Enter some data. And then let's see. Title, DB. Next one is the default. Okay, so I'm going to give myself a default here just so that I can, see what's going on. I'll use, who should we use? Use Thomas Jefferson. Thomas, and I'm going to put a vertical bar. Again, this could be anything that I know that I can delimit with. So vertical bar is usually on the same key as the backslash, so like shift backslash, Jefferson, vertical bar, and then the grade that I want, B+. Okay, So this is going to put up an input box. It's going to give this default here that if I just say OK, that's what's going to come through. So I'm going to do a little trick here. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to run up to this point. So there's my Thomas Jefferson B+. I will say OK. All right. So now if I look at data, it's just that string that was typed in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these pipes to be able to split this into an array. So I've got it here, and that's why I made data variant, so I could just say data equals split data based on a pipe. And so now my data variable, if I just say print it, it'll say, we don't know what you're talking about. You can't print an array. But I can now print data 0 should be the first name by itself. Data 1 should be the last name. And data 2 should be the grade. So it's for convenience here in running the example. Would I ever really expect a user to type in a formatted string like this? Maybe if the user was me, but not anybody else. So, okay. So now I'm just going to start replacing stuff in my SQL. SQL equals replace, looking at SQL, looking for the grade. We'll do the grade first. Has to be, it's got to match case, the bracket has to be there. And now looking for data sub 2. So let me come up here and look at SQL. So right now it's fully parameterized here. I am going to tell it, no, let's change SQL to find this angle bracket grade in here and replace it with the third parameter, the number 2 parameter that the user gave me. I'll execute that line and then come back and look at my SQL, and now I should have the B+ in here. So far so good? Can probably do the next two pretty easily. I've got first name, Berg. Got last name, and that should be 0 and 0. Last name. My first name is 0. My last name is number 1. Okay, I'll run those two. Look at my SQL, and it should now be, fully specified and ready to go in. Okay, hey, I'm feeling pretty good about this. Should be able to come back here now and just run this the rest of the way. I'm going to go and refresh that query. And there's Jefferson with a B+. Someone gave him a Q+. Ben Franklin failed. That's probably about right. Too busy thinking great things. Now, go ahead, question.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you could separate the SQL line.
Oh, could we separate this onto 2 lines? So, yeah, we can separate this onto 2 lines. I'm not sure why we'd want to, but I can do concatenate this. Yeah, that's where I'm headed. So you mean like this? So yeah, so I've got that on 2 lines. That's okay. So I just got 1 string and then concatenate with a line break here. If I want there to actually be a carriage return in there, like in the SQL that gets sent to the server, I'd have to put in I concatenate on a VB new line, which I could do, and the VBA or the SQL interpreter can handle line breaks in various places just fine.
I just didn't know to separate the strings and then
Yeah, that's what we'd have to do. Yeah, to concatenate it and then split it onto 2 lines. Okay, now let's give someone else a grade. I'm going to go run this, and instead of leaving it as Thomas Jefferson, I'm going to put it in as Thomas O'Malley. I don't know how to spell O'Malley, but it's got a single quote in it. We'll say OK, and we've got a problem. Subscript at a range, not what I was expecting to see. Did I get rid of the bar? I must have gotten rid of the bar. Okay, so that was an error, not the error I wanted to see. So let's see if we can get a different error. I got to change. Oh, yeah. Went to the spaces. So O'Malley. We'll say OK. Different error. Okay, so here's an error. I get incorrect syntax near Malley. What's going on here? So let me hit debug. Let me come here and look at my SQL. What's wrong? You see it? Yeah, that single quote in the name is causing a problem for the structured query language. So I'm coming along here and it says values. It goes, oh great, we got a string literal, single quote, Thomas, single quote, that's great, comma, just what we're expecting, single quote, O, single quote, great, there's the last name, and it gets to the Malley and it goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's not a reserved word, part of SQL. It's not the name of a table. It's not the name of a column or anything. It's just completely befuddled. Because just like in VBA, if I want to put the string terminator inside a string that has the same terminators, that's a problem. Now, what do I do in VBA if I want to put a quote inside a quote terminated string? Yeah, if I put two quotes, two double quotes. It's exactly the same thing in structured query language. And so here's what I'm going to do. When I put this in, instead of just putting in data 2, let me do a replace right around data 2. Replace. Yeah, we'll get that fixed here. Thank you. Replace. So there's data 2. That's what I'm looking at. Now, this is going to get ugly. And so I'm going to put the syntax in first. Comma, I got some string here, two double quotes, opening and closing quote, and then what I'm looking for, and then what I'm replacing it with, and then close my parenthesis. Whew. Okay, so the question is, what am I looking for in this? Single quote. So I got now double quote, single quote, double quote. And what am I going to replace that single quote with? Two single quotes. Quote, quote. So, yeah, is that confusing enough? That is. So let me highlight what's inside the string so we can see a little bit better. So there is, in fact, another way to do this, single quote is character number 34. So I could say, look for character number 34 and replace it with two character number 34s. Two character number 34s is not character number 68. You got to concatenate two together. I don't know which way is better. Do you like it better with the crazy quotes or with the? Some like the crazy quotes better. Because we only got 5 minutes, I'm going to stick with what I have right here. But let me just make sure that is char 34 if my memory serves me right. No, char 34 is a double quote. Char 33. Char 35. I don't know what it is. I'm going back to the quotes. It's not char 34. Okay, so quote, quote, quote. Quote, single quote, quote. Ooh. So I've got two single quotes inside the double quotes here. Okay. And actually, I'm going to do that for all of these. So anytime I find that single quote, I want to replace it with a double quote, a double single quote. This was 0 and then 1. All right, so I'm going to stop this. We'll try it again. And this time we're going to put in for Thomas O. Jefferson. So a lesser known Irish name. That executes OK. Should be able to come back here and check the query again. And there's OGov, O'Jefferson, O'Malley. So we've got some of those going in there. Okay. That is what you need to know for the project. In the next 3 minutes, I can probably show you something that will help with one of the major stumbling blocks you'll otherwise come across. Shall I do that? Okay. So, what do we do if there's no value? That's a problem that we're going to have to deal with. Sometimes there's no value. What do you put in there? There's a couple of options. One, if there's no value, say I've got no value for grade. One approach is to rebuild my whole structured query language statement so that it doesn't talk about expected grade. If there's no grade here, it just puts a first name, last name, it doesn't put the grade. It'll put a first name, last name, and there'll be no value for the grade. And that's a fine way to do it. It's a lot more complicated than what I'm about to show you. So my other thing that I can do here is I could plug in, let's see, do I have the SQL showing here somewhere? I can say, yeah, go ahead and put something in for expected grade, but instead of putting in quotes, E+, use the reserved SQL word null, not in quotes. It's a reserved word. So I can get that will just say, great, we're first name, last name, and expected value. What are we putting in? Thomas, Jefferson, and nothing. That one's going to be blank. That's how I actually insert a blank value. So I can either say, don't say anything about expected grade and don't provide a value, or say something about expected grade, but change this to null. Okay? So now, how will I deal with that? Let's do this. We're going to do it just with one of these variables, because in your code, you probably won't be working with an array. You'll probably just be working with a variable. So let's look just at data 2. If the length of data sub 2 is equal to 0, so it's a 0 length string, then I have a couple things, else and if. Okay, so if it's a 0 length string, then we're going to say data sub 2 equals the keyword null. Doesn't have to be in uppercase, but I'm putting in uppercase. Otherwise, data sub 2 equals, I'm going to put it, now, because the null can't have the quotes around it, I've got a problem. I've put the quotes right here. They're in my template. You know what? I think I'm going to leave it just like that. I'm going to leave them there. And I'm going to say, listen, if data sub 2 is null, if it's 0, put the word in null. Now, this is actually going to put the keyword null into my database. So here's what I'm going to do. Right before I execute the query, I'm going to bring it back to this stuff right here. We're going to run that. I'm going to get rid of this grade altogether. That should give me a 0 length string in the last part. Okay, so now if I look at my structured query language statement, I've probably successfully found that that was a blank string and put in the keyword null. But you see, because there's quotes around this, if I execute this, what's it going to put in my database? It's going to put null right there into the database. And so right here, just before I execute my SQL, SQL equals replace. R-E-P-L-A-C-E. Look at SQL. Look for something, replace it with something. What am I looking for? Quote, null, quote, and replace it with null. Not an empty string. But an empty string, that's going to be a problem. I actually have to get the word null in there without quotes. So let me execute that. Actually, I'll just go ahead and run that the rest of the way. Oops, syntax error. SQL, R-E-P-L-A-C-E, SQL. SQL does not need to be lowercase. It should correct. Thank you. That should be single quote there, single quote there. Okay, so that ran through. And so now let's see what we have here. So several other of you were able to make that happen as well. So we've got that going. So what that did was it replaced the null with the quotes around it just with null without the quotes, which got us back to just what we were after. And so that way, you know, if I can kind of do this on any variable that I want, I'm going to end up with null in quotes, and then just with one stroke of the pen, I'm going to rewrite those to be null without quotes. And that's the little trick that we're doing here. That's probably the simplest way to get there. Lots of other ways to get this string formatted the way, but that's kind of a simple one. Okay, folks, you've got what you need now to be able to do the project. I'm not quite sure when it's due, but now you can work on it after Thanksgiving dinner. This means that in class Monday, number one, I will not be taking attendance. Number two, I won't be presenting any new information. So I'll be here to answer questions, and we can kind of use it as lab time if you're in town and want to come and work in a place where you've got questions to ask. We'll do that here. All right, sorry for holding you over. Class dismissed.